The bruise on her jaw had turned the color of prairie sunsets, purple bleeding into yellow, and Mara Owens knew she would have to lie about it again come morning. She pressed her fingers against the tender flesh, wincing as she sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the cramped room above the general store where her husband kept her like a prisoner with a key. It was 1878, and Albuquerque, New Mexico was growing fast with the railroad bringing new faces every week. But none of those faces ever looked at her long enough to see what Silas was doing behind closed doors. The worst part was not the hitting itself, but the reason for it, something she could not control no matter how hard she tried. She talked in her sleep, mumbling fragments of dreams she could never remember, and every time her unconscious voice woke Silas from his whiskey-soaked slumber, his fists reminded her that even in sleep, a woman was supposed to be silent. Tonight had been worse than usual. She had been dreaming of her mother's farm in Missouri, the one they lost after the war, and apparently she had been calling out for her sister who died of fever 6 years back. Silas had woken in a rage, accusing her of talking to other men even in her dreams, and his hands had found her throat before moving to her face. Now he was downstairs in the saloon, drinking away what little money they had while she tried to stop her hands from shaking. The small mirror on the wall showed her reflection, and she barely recognized the hollow-eyed woman staring back. She was 23 years old but felt ancient, worn down like the wooden steps of the building that creaked under too many boots. She knew she could not stay. The thought had been building in her mind for months, but tonight it crystallized into certainty. If she stayed, Silas would eventually kill her, either with his fists or by crushing whatever spark of life remained in her chest. Mara moved quietly, though Silas could not hear her from down in the saloon anyway. She pulled her only other dress from the hook on the wall, rolled it tight, and wrapped it in the quilt her grandmother had made. She had $8 hidden in the toe of her winter boot, money she had been saving from selling eggs at the market when Silas allowed her to go. It was not much, but it would have to be enough. The window overlooked the alley behind the store. Mara pushed it open, grateful that the hinges did not squeak, and looked down at the 12-foot drop. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she tied her bundle to her waist with a length of rope. She had never been brave, never been the kind of woman who took risks, but desperation had a way of changing a person. She climbed onto the windowsill, her legs trembling, and lowered herself down as far as her arms could reach before letting go. The impact jolted through her ankles, and she bit her tongue to keep from crying out, tasting blood. For a moment, she just stood there in the dark alley, hardly believing she had done it. The night air was cool against her skin as she hurried through the shadows, keeping away from the main street where lamplight spilled from saloon windows and rowdy voices carried on the breeze. She had no plan beyond getting away, no destination except anywhere that was not here. Her feet carried her east, toward the edge of town where the buildings thinned out and the desert began. Behind her, Albuquerque settled into its nightly rhythm of gambling, drinking, and fighting, oblivious to one woman's escape. She walked for hours, stumbling over rocks and struggling to see in the moonlight. Her thin boots were not made for this kind of journey, and her feet began to blister, but she pushed forward, driven by the image of Silas discovering her empty room. He would come after her, she knew. Men like him did not let their property walk away. The thought made her move faster, even as exhaustion pulled at her limbs. When dawn finally broke over the mountains to the east, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, she found herself on a dusty road she did not recognize, with no water and no idea which direction to go. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became oppressive. Mara's throat felt like sandpaper, and her vision started to blur at the edges. She knew she was in trouble, that she had not thought this through, but turning back was not an option. She kept walking, one foot in front of the other, until her legs finally gave out and she collapsed beside a scraggly juniper tree that offered almost no shade. This is how it ends, she thought, dying of thirst in the desert because she was too foolish to bring water. At least Silas would not have the satisfaction of killing her himself. She must have passed out because the next thing she knew, there was a shadow blocking the sun and a rough hand was shaking her shoulder. Mara's eyes flew open and she tried to scramble backward, raising her arms to protect her face, certain that Silas had found her. But the voice that spoke was not her husband's sharp snarl. "Easy now, miss. I am not going to hurt you." The voice was low and gentle, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas or maybe further south. Mara lowered her arms slowly and looked up at the man crouching beside her. He was tall, she could tell even with him crouched down, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled at his collar beneath a battered hat. His eyes were a startling shade of blue-green, like water in a clean creek, and they looked at her with concern rather than anger. "What are you doing out here without water or a horse?" Her voice came out as a croak and she started coughing. The man, the cowboy, she realized, noting his dusty chaps and the rope coiled at his belt, immediately reached for a canteen at his hip and held it to her lips. She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin until he gently pulled it away. "Slow now, or you will make yourself sick," he said. "When did you last drink?" "Yesterday evening," Mara managed. Now that the immediate panic was fading, she took in more details. He had a kind face, weathered by sun and wind but young, maybe 26 or 27. A horse stood a few yards away, a handsome buckskin with a white star on its forehead, watching them with patient eyes. The cowboy wore a gun at his hip, but he had not reached for it, had not threatened her in any way. "Thank you. I thought I was going to die." "You might have another few hours in this heat." He sat back on his heels, studying her face, and she saw the moment his eyes registered the bruises. His jaw tightened, but he did not comment on them directly. "Name is Harris Ramsey. I work for a ranch about 15 miles north of here. You running from something?" Mara hesitated, then nodded. There seemed no point in lying, not with her face telling the story anyway. "Someone. My husband." "He the one who gave you those bruises?" "Yes." Harris was quiet for a long moment, his eyes still on her face. Then he stood and offered her his hand. "Can you ride? My horse can carry double for a spell, and there is a way station about 10 miles west. Woman there named Rosa who takes in travelers. You would be safe there while you figure out your next move." Mara stared at his outstretched hand, hardly daring to believe this stroke of luck. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." "Do not need to know you to see you need help." His voice was matter of fact, as if rescuing women from the desert was something he did every day. "Besides, any man who beats on a woman is not much of a man in my book. Come on now, before this heat gets worse." She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Her legs wobbled and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow, his touch careful and respectful. He led her to his horse and mounted first, then reached down to pull her up behind him. It felt strange to be this close to a man who was not Silas, to wrap her arms around his waist and feel the solid warmth of him. But it felt safe too, in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. They rode in silence for a while, the horse moving at a steady walk across the desert landscape. Mara found herself studying the back of Harris's neck, the way his dark hair curled against his collar, the set of his shoulders. He sat in the saddle like he was born there, moving with the horse's rhythm in a way that spoke of years in the saddle. After about an hour he spoke without turning around. You got a name, Miss Mara. Mara Owens, though I do not plan to use the Owens part much longer if I can help it. Fair enough. Mara is a good name, means bitter in Hebrew, I think, though you do not seem bitter to me. Scared maybe, but not bitter. How do you know Hebrew? The question came out before she could stop it, and she felt him shrug. My mother was educated, taught school before she married my father. She made sure I learned to read more than just cattle brands. There was affection in his voice when he spoke of his mother. She died 3 years back. Fever. I am sorry, Mara said and meant it. I lost my mother too and my sister. Sometimes I dream about them and I guess I talk in my sleep about it. That is what set Silas off last night, me talking in my sleep. Harris turned his head slightly, enough that she could see his profile. He beat you for talking in your sleep. He said I was too loud, that I woke him up. He works hard, he always says, and he needs his rest. Even as she said the words, she heard how hollow they sounded, how much they were just echoes of Silas's justifications. That is about the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. Harris's voice had an edge to it now, anger simmering beneath the surface. A man who would beat his wife for something she cannot control, something as innocent as talking in her sleep. He shook his head. If you were mine, I would tell you to talk all night if it helps you rest. I would rather lose sleep than see you afraid to close your eyes. The words hit Mara like a physical thing, landing somewhere in her chest and making it hard to breathe. The casual kindness of it, the simple decency, was so foreign to her experience with Silas that she did not know how to respond. She tightened her arms around Harris's waist slightly and felt him relax a bit, as if her touch reassured him that she was still there, still safe. The way station appeared in the distance about an hour later, a low adobe building with a corral and a well. Smoke rose from the chimney and chickens scratched in the dust of the yard. A woman emerged as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. She was probably 50, with gray streaking her black hair and a face that suggested she had seen her share of hardship but had not let it break her. Her eyes went immediately to Mara's bruised face and her expression hardened. Harris Ramsey, what have you brought me? Her voice carried a slight Spanish accent. Found her in the desert, Miss Rosa. She is running from her husband and needs a safe place to rest up. Harris dismounted and reached up to help Mara down. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet hit the ground, and he kept his hands on her waist until she was steady. Rosa came forward and took Mara's chin gently in her hand, tilting her face to examine the bruises. He did this because why? I talk in my sleep, Mara said quietly. Rosa's expression went from hard to furious. Men. They are children in grown bodies, most of them. She released Mara's chin and put an arm around her shoulders, guiding her toward the building. Come, you need food and rest. Harris, you staying for a meal? If you are offering, need to water Buck anyway. Harris led his horse toward the well. Inside, the way station was simple but clean, with a main room that served as kitchen and eating area, and what looked like 2 smaller rooms off to the side. Rosa sat Mara down at the wooden table and bustled about, producing bread, cheese, and dried fruit. Eat slowly. You look half-starved. Mara obeyed, taking small bites even though her stomach growled with hunger. Rosa poured her a cup of water and sat down across from her, studying her with sharp eyes. How long were you married to this man? 2 years. We met in Santa Fe. He seemed nice at first, charming even, but after the wedding. Mara trailed off, not wanting to recount all the small cruelties that had built up over time. They always seem nice at first, Rosa said grimly. My first husband, he was the same. Smiled at everyone in town, then came home and used me as his punching bag. One day I decided I had enough. I took a frying pan to his head while he slept and left him snoring on the floor, never looked back. Mara's eyes widened. "You hit him." He woke up with a headache, nothing more, but it gave me time to get away. "I came here, bought this place with money my mother left me, and I have been helping women like us ever since." Rosa reached across the table and squeezed Mara's hand. "You can stay here as long as you need. I will not let him take you back." The door opened and Harris came in, removing his hat. He had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe. Rosa dished up food for him, and he sat down at the table, leaving a respectful distance between himself and Mara. They ate in companionable silence for a while, and Mara found herself stealing glances at Harris when she thought he was not looking. There was something about him that made her feel safe, protected in a way she had never felt with Sila's. After the meal, Rosa showed Mara to one of the small rooms. It held a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk. "Rest now. We will talk more later about what comes next." Mara nodded, exhaustion crashing over her now that she was safe and fed. She lay down on the bed, not even bothering to remove her dusty dress, and was asleep within minutes. She woke hours later to the sound of voices in the main room. The light coming through the small window was slanted, late afternoon, and she realized she had slept for several hours. She rose and washed her face with water from the pitcher on the washstand, trying to make herself presentable before venturing out. Harris was still there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression made her heart skip. He looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth seeing. "You feeling better?" "Much, thank you, for everything you have done." Mara sat down at the table and Rosa appeared with more coffee, pressing a cup into her hands. "Harris was just telling me he needs to get back to the ranch," Rosa said, "but he will be passing through again in a few days. He works for the MacGregor spread, runs their cattle between here and Colorado." "That is a long way," Mara said, looking at Harris. "It is, but I like the work, like being on the move." He turned his cup in his hands, not quite meeting her eyes. "Listen, I know you just got away from a bad situation, and the last thing you probably want is another man bothering you. But would it be all right if I came back in a few days to check on you, just to make sure you are settling in all right?" Mara felt warmth spread through her chest at the careful way he phrased it, asking permission rather than assuming. "I would like that." Harris smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face. "Good. That is good." He stood, draining the last of his coffee. "I should get going before dark. Miss Rosa, thank you for the meal. Mara, you take care of yourself." After he left, Rosa sat down across from Mara with a knowing look. "That one is a good man. I have known him for 3 years, since he started working for MacGregor. Never known him to be anything but honest and kind." "I barely know him," Mara protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Sometimes that is all it takes, seeing someone's true character in how they treat a stranger." Rosa patted her hand. "Now let us talk practical matters. You need work if you are going to stay here, and I could use help around this place. The pay is not much, but you would have room and board. What do you say?" Mara felt tears prick her eyes. "You would do that for me?" "I would do it for any woman trying to escape a bad man, but also I like you. You have strength in you, even if you do not see it yet." Rosa stood and began clearing the table. "Tomorrow we start fresh. Tonight just rest." The next few days fell into a rhythm. Mara helped Rosa with cooking, cleaning, and tending to the occasional travelers who stopped at the way station. The work was hard but honest, and for the first time in 2 years she went to bed at night without fear. She still talked in her sleep, she knew, because Rosa mentioned hearing her voice through the thin walls, but there was no punishment for it here, no violence waiting in the morning. On the 4th day, Harris returned. Mara was feeding the chickens when she heard the sound of hooves and looked up to see him riding into the yard. Her heart did something complicated in her chest, a flutter that was part nervousness and part something else, something she was afraid to name. "Morning," he called out, dismounting. "Thought I would take you up on that check-in if you are not too busy. I am never too busy for someone who saved my life." Mara set down the bucket of feed and brushed off her hands. "Would you like some coffee? Rosa just made a fresh pot." They sat on the bench outside the way station, cups warming their hands despite the heat of the day. Harris told her about the cattle drive, about the ornery bull that kept trying to wander off, and the thunderstorm that had scattered half the herd. Mara found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in what felt like years, and Harris watched her laugh with something soft in his eyes, something tender. "It is good to hear you laugh," he said quietly. "You should do it more often." "I have not had much to laugh about until recently." Mara looked down at her coffee. "Thank you for coming back. You did not have to. I wanted to." Harris shifted on the bench, angling himself toward her. "Mara, I know this is too soon. I know you just got out of a terrible situation, and you probably need time to heal. But I need to tell you that I have not stopped thinking about you since I found you in that desert. The way you were so scared but still fighting to survive. The way you look when you think no one is watching and your guard comes down. I think you are one of the bravest people I ever met." Mara's breath caught in her throat. "Harris, You do not have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I just wanted you to know. And I wanted you to know that I will be coming back this way regular, every week or two, and I would like to see you when I do, if you are willing." She looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in the honesty in his eyes and the hopeful set of his shoulders. This man who had asked nothing of her, who had given freely without expecting anything in return. "I would like that very much." Harris's smile was bright as sunrise. They sat together on that bench until the sun climbed high, talking about everything and nothing. And Mara felt something she had thought was dead inside her begin to stir back to life. It felt like hope. True to his word, Harris came back every week or two over the next several months. Each visit was a little longer than the last, and each time he left, Mara found she missed him more. They took walks in the desert in the cooler evening hours, and he taught her the names of plants and showed her how to read the signs of weather in the clouds. He told her about his family's ranch in Texas that he had left after his mother died, unable to stay in the place that reminded him so much of her loss. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, the farm and the horses and the sister who used to braid flowers in her hair. One evening about 6 months after their first meeting, they were sitting by the well watching the sun set when Harris reached over and took her hand. The touch sent electricity through her arm and she looked at him, finding him already watching her. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice serious. "There has been a man asking around Albuquerque about a woman matching your description. Says his wife ran off and he is looking for her." Fear flooded through Mara and she tried to pull her hand back, but Harris held on gently. "It is all right. I did not tell him anything and neither did anyone else I talked to, but I think we need to be careful. He is determined. He always was stubborn." Mara's voice shook. "He will not stop looking." "Then maybe it is time to give you a reason he cannot touch you, even if he finds you." Harris squeezed her hand. "Mara, I love you. I think I have loved you since I saw you curled up under that juniper tree, too stubborn to die. I know we have not known each other long by some standards, but I know my own heart. Marry me. Not because you need protection, though that is a fine reason too, but because I want to spend my days hearing your voice and my nights listening to whatever you need to say, awake or asleep." Tears streamed down Mara's face, but for once they were happy tears. "I love you too. I did not think I could feel this way, not after Sela's, but you showed me what kindness looks like, what real love looks like. Yes, I will marry you." Harris pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and she felt safe in a way she had never experienced before. Not just protected, but cherished, valued for who she was rather than what she could provide. When he kissed her, gentle and sweet, it felt like coming home. They were married 2 weeks later in the way station, with Rosa standing as witness and a circuit judge Harris knew performing the ceremony. Mara wore a new dress that Rosa had helped her sew, blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Harris wore his best shirt and had even trimmed his hair, though it still curled at his collar in the way that made her want to run her fingers through it. When the judge pronounced them married, Harris kissed her in front of God and Rosa and the chickens scratching in the yard, and Mara felt her old life fall away completely. She was no longer Silas's victim. She was Harris's wife, and more than that, she was her own person, free to speak and dream and live without fear. They spent their first night together in one of Rosa's rooms, and Harris was patient and gentle, letting Mara set the pace. He kissed every bruise that remained on her skin, old yellow marks that were finally fading, and whispered promises against her hair. When she cried, overwhelmed by the tenderness of it all, he held her and told her she was safe, that he would spend every day of his life making sure she never had cause to fear again. The next morning, they set out for the MacGregor ranch where Harris worked. The owner, Duncan MacGregor, was a gruff Scotsman who ran a tight operation but treated his men fair. When Harris introduced Mara as his wife, Duncan looked her over with sharp eyes that missed nothing, including the fading bruises. "You will be needing a place then," he said. "Got a cabin on the east section that has been sitting empty. It is not much, but it is solid. You can fix it up however you like." The cabin was small, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it sat on a rise overlooking a valley where cattle grazed and mountains rose purple in the distance. Mara fell in love with it immediately. Over the next few weeks, she and Harris worked together to make it a home. They built furniture, hung curtains that Mara sewed from fabric Rosa gave them as a wedding gift, and planted a small garden near the door. Harris carved their initials into the door frame, HR and MR, making her new name official. Life fell into a comfortable pattern. Harris worked the cattle during the day while Mara tended their home, the garden, and the chickens they acquired. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set, talking about their days and making plans for the future. At night, Harris would pull her close and tell her to say whatever she needed to say, that her voice would never bother him. And when she did talk in her sleep, crying out for her lost sister or murmuring fragments of dreams, he would stroke her hair and whisper reassurances until she quieted, never once complaining about lost rest. 8 months into their marriage, Mara realized she was with child. The knowledge filled her with joy but also fear, memories of Silas and what kind of father he would have been. Harris found her crying in the garden one afternoon and sat down beside her in the dirt, taking her hands. "What is wrong? Is it the baby? Are you sick?" "No, I am fine. The baby is fine." Mara wiped at her tears. "I am just scared. What if I am not a good mother? What if I mess this up?" Harris pulled her into his arms, heedless of the dirt on both of them. "You are going to be a wonderful mother. Look at how you care for everything around you, the garden and the chickens and even me. This baby is going to be so loved, so wanted, and I will be right there with you, every step. What if our child talks in their sleep?" The question came out small and scared. Harris pulled back to look at her, his eyes fierce. "Then we will be glad they trust us enough to speak their dreams out loud. We will never, ever make them feel ashamed of something so innocent. I promise you that, Mara. Our children will grow up knowing they are loved exactly as they are." She believed him. Over the months of their marriage, Harris had never given her cause to doubt his word. When he made a promise, he kept it. Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1880, with Rosa and the ranch owner's wife in attendance. The labor was long and hard, and Mara thought she might die from the pain. But when Harris was finally allowed in and the baby was placed in his arms, the look on his face made every moment worth it. He stared down at their son with such wonder, such complete devotion, that Mara felt her heart might burst. "What should we call him?" Harris asked, sitting on the edge of the bed so she could see them both. "I was thinking Henry, after your father, Henry Ramsey." Harris's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "He would have loved that. Henry it is." Henry turned out to be an easy baby, sleeping well and only crying when he was hungry or needed changing. But he did talk in his sleep, little murmurs and coos, and true to his word, Harris never complained. He would sometimes wake Mara in the night just to listen to their son's sleep sounds, smiling in the darkness. 3 years later, they had a daughter they named Margaret after Mara's sister. She was wild from the start, all energy and curiosity, keeping them constantly on their toes. 2 years after that came another boy, Samuel, who was quiet and thoughtful even as an infant. Their family grew and their home rang with laughter and noise, everything Mara had once thought she would never have. One evening when Henry was 7 and already helping his father with the cattle, Mara stood on the porch watching Harris teach their son to rope a practice post. Margaret was at her feet playing with a doll Rosa had made, and Samuel was asleep in his cradle inside. The sun was setting, painting the world in gold and amber, and Mara felt a sense of peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Harris looked up from the roping lesson and caught her watching. He said something to Henry, then walked over to the porch, concern on his face when he saw her tears. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right." Mara reached up to cup his face, this man who had saved her in more ways than one. "I was just thinking about that day in the desert when you found me. I was so certain I was going to die. And I was just out checking the fence line, not even supposed to be in that area." Harris covered her hand with his. "Duncan still says it is a miracle I went that way." "Maybe it was," Mara smiled. "Or maybe some things are just meant to be. Either way, I am grateful every single day that you told me I could talk all night if it helps me rest. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. You can still talk all night, you know. In fact, you were quite chatty last night, something about teaching Margaret to make bread." Harris grinned. "Woke me up around 2 in the morning, but I just laid there and listened. Liked hearing you so happy, even in your dreams." "I am happy, happier than I ever thought possible." Mara pulled him down for a kiss, not caring that Henry would see and probably make gagging noises. "I love you, Harris Ramsey." "I love you too, Mara Ramsey." He wrapped his arms around her waist, holding her close as the sun continued its descent. "And I am going to keep loving you until the day I die, and probably beyond that too." The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and growing children. They added on to the cabin as their family grew, building extra rooms and a bigger porch. Harris eventually became Duncan's foreman, and when the old Scotsman retired, he sold them a section of the ranch at a price they could afford. They built it into something successful, a place where cattle grazed fat on good grass and horses ran free in the pastures. Henry grew up to be a fine cattleman like his father, steady and reliable. Margaret surprised everyone by becoming fascinated with veterinary medicine after they had a sick horse, and she eventually went east to study, one of the few women accepted into the program. Samuel turned out to have a gift with numbers and helped run the business side of the ranch. Through it all, Harris and Mara remained devoted to each other. They had their arguments, as any couple does, but they always worked through them with honesty and respect. And every night, without fail, Harris would pull Mara close and tell her she could talk all night if she needed to, that her voice was music to him sleeping or awake. On their 20th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. The cabin was full of people, including Rosa, who was now in her 70s but still sharp as ever. There was music and dancing and food enough to feed the county. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Henry stood up to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. "Dad, you taught me what it means to be a man, not through violence or force, but through kindness and integrity. You showed me that real strength is in how you treat the people weaker than you, how you lift them up instead of pushing them down." He turned to Mara. "And Mama, you taught me about resilience and courage. You could have let your past break you, but instead you built something beautiful from the ashes. You both gave us the best childhood anyone could ask for, and we love you more than words can say." There was not a dry eye in the room as they all raised their glasses. Mara looked at Harris and found him already watching her, the same love in his eyes that had been there the day he found her in the desert all those years ago. They had built a good life together, a happy life, full of children and laughter and the kind of deep contentment that comes from being truly known and loved anyway. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, they lay in their bed with the window open to let in the cool night air. Mara was nearly asleep when Harris spoke. "You know what I was thinking about today? That juniper tree where I found you. I went back there once, maybe 5 years ago, just to see it again. It is still there, still fighting to survive in that harsh place." "Why did you go back?" Mara asked, rolling over to face him. "Because I wanted to remember. Not the bad parts, not you being hurt and scared. But the moment when I realized I had found something precious that I had not even known I was looking for." Harris traced her face with his fingers, following the familiar lines. "You were so brave, Mara. You ran into the desert with nothing, risking death rather than staying with a man who hurt you. That kind of courage, that is the foundation everything else is built on. I did not feel brave. I felt terrified. Being brave does not mean you are not scared. It means you do what needs to be done despite the fear." Harris pulled her closer. "And you have been doing that every day since, choosing to trust again, choosing to love again, choosing to believe in a future. I am so proud of you." Mara felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were the good kind, the kind that came from being overwhelmed with happiness. "I could not have done any of it without you. You gave me permission to be myself, to take up space, to speak my mind and my dreams. That gift, Harris, it is everything." They held each other in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the New Mexico night through the open window. Somewhere in the house, one of their children murmured in their sleep, and they both smiled. The cycle continued, another generation learning that it was safe to dream out loud, safe to be vulnerable, safe to trust in love. As Mara drifted off to sleep in Harris's arms, she thought about the long road that had brought her here. The pain and fear of her first marriage, the desperate flight into the desert, the moment a kind cowboy had looked at her with compassion instead of contempt. Every step had been necessary. Every hardship had shaped her into the woman she was now. She would not wish those experiences on anyone, but she could not regret them either, not when they had led her here. She began to dream, and in her dream she was talking, words spilling out in a happy stream. She was telling someone about her children, about the ranch, about the man she loved who had taught her that she deserved kindness. And in the real world, lying beside her, Harris heard her sleep talking and smiled. He listened to her voice, content and peaceful, and pulled her a little closer. "Talk all night if you want to, love," he whispered against her hair. "I am right here, and I am not going anywhere." And they slept, Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something lasting, something true. Their story was not about grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though it had started that way. It was about choosing each other every single day, about the small kindnesses that built up over time into something unshakable. It was about a woman who found her voice and a man who celebrated every word she spoke. The years continued to roll by like the seasons, each one bringing new joys and challenges. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their family tree spreading out in branches they never could have imagined. Through it all, the cabin on the hill remained standing, a testament to what they had built together. When Harris was 71 and Mara was 68, he fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. For weeks, she sat by his bedside, applying cool cloths to his fevered skin and forcing him to drink broth even when he did not want to. Their children came to say goodbye, convinced he would not make it, but Mara refused to accept that. She talked to him constantly, telling him stories of their life together, reminding him of all the reasons he had to fight. And he did fight, clawing his way back from the edge because she was there calling him home. When he finally opened his eyes and smiled at her, she burst into tears of relief. The doctor called it a miracle, but Harris knew better. It was love, pure and simple, the kind that refused to let go even when death came knocking. "You are stuck with me a while longer," he told her when he was strong enough to sit up. "Good," she replied, gripping his hand tight, "because I am not done talking to you yet." They got another decade together. Good years full of watching their family grow and enjoying the fruits of their labor. The ranch prospered under Samuel's management, and they were able to spend their days doing what they loved most, which was being together. They took slow walks around the property, pointing out changes and remembering how things used to be. They sat on the porch in rocking chairs Harris had made, watching sunsets that never got old. Harris died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 81, with Mara beside him like she had been every night for more than 50 years. She woke in the morning to find him gone, his hand still holding hers, a slight smile on his face like he was having a pleasant dream. The pain of losing him was profound, a grief that reached into her very bones, but there was peace in it too. They had lived a good life, a full life, and she had been loved by a good man who had seen her at her worst and chosen to stay anyway. At the funeral, with all their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered around, Margaret stood up to speak. She told the story of how her father had found her mother in the desert and brought her to safety. She talked about the lesson he had taught them all, that love was not about control or possession, but about creating space for another person to flourish. And she ended with the thing he used to say to their mother, the phrase that had become something of a family motto. "Talk all night if it helps you rest." Those words define my father's approach to love and to life. He believed that everyone deserved to be heard, to be seen, to take up space in the world, and he spent his life making sure we all knew that truth. Margaret looked at Mara, tears streaming down her face. "Mama, he loved you so much. We all do." Mara lived another 8 years after Harris died, surrounded by family who made sure she was never alone. She told her great-grandchildren stories about their great-grandfather, making sure they knew the man he had been. And every night, as she lay in the bed they had shared for so many years, she talked out loud, telling Harris about her day and what the children were up to. It helped her feel close to him, like he was still there listening. When she died at the age of 91, it was peacefully, surrounded by her children who held her hands and told her it was all right to go. Her last words were simple: "I hear him calling me home." They buried her next to Harris on the hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. And if you visit that spot today, You can still see the headstone, weathered by more than a century of New Mexico wind and rain. It reads simply, Harris Ramsey, beloved husband and father, and Mara Ramsey, beloved wife and mother. Their dates are listed, and beneath that, a line that their children insisted on including. She talked, he listened, they loved. It was, in the end, a simple truth that held a lifetime of meaning. In a harsh land and a harder time, two people had found each other and chosen kindness over cruelty, love over fear. They had built something lasting, not through grand gestures but through daily choice, through showing up for each other even when it was hard, through creating space for each other to be fully human. Their descendants still run the ranch, now one of the most successful in New Mexico. The original cabin has been preserved and turned into a small museum that tells their story. People come from all over to see it, to hear about the woman who ran into the desert and the cowboy who told her she could talk all night. It has become something of a legend, a reminder that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, and that real love looks like someone saying, "You are safe here, exactly as you are." And on quiet nights when the wind blows just right across the New Mexico desert, people swear they can hear voices on the breeze. A woman talking, happy and free, and a man's low voice responding with words of love and encouragement. Maybe it is just the wind playing tricks. Or maybe some stories are too powerful to be contained by something as simple as death. Maybe love like that echoes forever, a testament to what is possible when two people choose each other against all odds. The ranch still stands, the descendants still prosper, and the story continues to be told. Because some things are worth remembering, worth passing down through generations. The story of Mara and Harris Ramsey is one of those things, a reminder that kindness matters, that how we treat the vulnerable says everything about who we are, and that real love creates space for the beloved to be entirely themselves, dreams and fears and sleep talking and all. Their legacy is not just in the land they built or the children they raised, though both are impressive. Their legacy is in the lesson they taught, that everyone deserves to be heard, to be valued, to speak their truth without fear of punishment. That lesson rippled out through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, creating waves of kindness that touched countless lives. And so the story ends where it began, in the New Mexico desert under a wide blue sky. But this time, instead of a woman running for her life with no hope and no future, there is a family, a legacy, a love story that lasted a lifetime and beyond. This time, there is proof that choosing courage, choosing kindness, choosing love can transform not just individual lives but entire family trees. This time, there is a happy ending, hard-won and well-deserved. The juniper tree where Harris found Mara still stands in the desert, ancient and gnarled, still fighting to survive in harsh conditions. It has become something of a pilgrimage site, with people leaving small tokens beneath its branches. Notes of hope, pictures of loved ones, prayers for courage. Because Mara's story is not just her own. It belongs to everyone who has ever felt trapped, ever felt voiceless, ever felt like running into the desert was their only option. And Harris's story belongs to everyone who has chosen to be kind when cruelty would be easier, who has chosen to listen when silence would be more comfortable, who has chosen to love without conditions or qualifications. His simple statement, "Talk all night if it helps you rest," became a philosophy of life, a way of being in the world that prioritized the well-being of others. Together, they proved that healing is possible, that love can exist without fear, and that the right person will celebrate every part of you, even the parts you have been taught to hide. They built a life, a family, a legacy that continues to inspire more than a century after their first meeting. And that, perhaps, is the best happy ending anyone could ask for. A love that outlasted their lives, a story that continues to give hope, and proof that sometimes the universe conspires to bring together exactly the people who need each other most.